Welcome to Legends to Leaders, the podcast dedicated to bringing the wisdom of perioperative legends to the fresh perspectives of newly promoted directors of surgical services. Today, we're honored to kick off the journey with legend Cindy Bess. As a BSN prepared registered nurse and certified legal nurse consultant, Cindy has spent over 2 decades transforming perioperative environments, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. But in her latest venture as an author and publisher of Rosewind Press, she continues to influence the field, sharing insights through publications like her feature in Outpatient Surgery magazine. Cindy was honored with the Nurse Excellence Award from the University of Washington Medical Center, and today she joins us on Legends to Leaders to discuss her thoughts on handling difficult negotiations with surgeons and anesthesiologists. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Cindy, let's start here. When a nurse leader steps into his or her first director role, what types of negotiations with surgeons or anesthesiologists tend to catch them off guard?
Well, as I recall, many years ago, like you said, a couple decades ago, my very first position, the thing that caught me off guard was really not knowing who was in charge, what my power was, what things I had to make decisions about. I had to find out very quickly what the org chart basically was. The medical director was basically in charge of everything to begin with. And as we developed a relationship and trust, that relationship and the power shift changed to me being able to make decisions. But we had to feel the waters. And I believe in any dyad relationship with a medical director, as manager, director of a surgical center or an inpatient center, you have to feel out those strategies and relationships. And it was interesting because I had no experience with it before. It was a very steep learning curve. And so as we developed a relationship, it got better, and we felt our way through it.
So you need to develop trust early. They say that everything begins on a foundation of trust. If you're new in this role, how would you recommend that he or she develop trust with that dyad relationship surgeon or medical director?
Well, in future relationships with every new medical director and with sometimes chairman of specialty departments, I had interesting situations, and they all basically ended up me developing a trust relationship with that provider, whether it be the chair of a specialty of surgeons or the medical director that I was a dyad partner with. And we had basically a triad because there was a medical director and there was anesthesia directors in every place that I worked. And so anesthesia director was kind of an ad hoc part of the triad. Whenever that was needed, we'd bring that person in. But usually it was me and the medical director forming a relationship and trust based on the structure and the way it was set up with various committees involving chairs of specialties and surgery and so on. But it was very interesting. There were times, I'm only 5'1" on a tall day, and there was a time that I recall in particular, me just basically standing on tippy toes and looking straight into a surgeon's eyes. He was accusing me of standing in the way of quality patient care because I was trying to uphold standards. And I remember that situation where I looked straight in his eyes and told him I was not standing in the way of quality patient care. And I said, I'm inviting you to go have a cup of coffee.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And so we did. And we sat down, and he kind of settled down and realized that I wasn't there to make his life miserable, that we had the same goals and patient safety and quality and so on. And so that started out our relationship on secondarily. The first one wasn't too great. He got hot really quick. So it was interesting. And so there were situations not quite that dramatic, that followed in different organizations, but basically the same thing. Figuring out a way to meet your partner that you lead with, wherever you're at, and determine, who's doing what, and that trust is critical because you got their back, they got your back in any situation. And there were times when, I kind of represented the staff and the company, and the goodwill of the company, and the medical director would represent the surgeons and their interests and so on. But I never blindsided any of my medical directors. If there was something coming up, we would talk about it, beforehand, so that they were all involved. And so they appreciated that, and then they did the same for me. And so it took a while to figure out how to do that, and and then it became just natural, to do that when I come into a new organization, to meet them, to figure out how they worked, figure out their communication style. Um, and also, every organization has a little bit different setup as far as their committees and their leadership committees, how often they meet, and so on. So there's a lot of that to find out, and to figure out what has come before, your predecessor. How did they run the committee? Did you co-chair the committee, the leadership committee of the department? So a lot of things to find out. It's a fact-finding mission for quite a while at the beginning.
So I couldn't help but notice that you mentioned height. And I took that to mean that you are shorter than let's just say the 6 foot tall orthopedic surgeon for this
Sure.
conversation. Another way of measuring that sometimes is by income. For example, your income is in the hundreds, 200s. The orthopedic surgeon might be over $1 million, for example. So what we're
Right.
talking about is a bit of an imbalance. Yet it seems as though you are right sizing in terms of the respect to each other, that it should be on a level playing field. What kind of tips and tricks might you give to a newly promoted director of surgical services to right size the respect balance?
Well, you have to find out what's important to them, the other side, the people you're working with that are in power, the people that you govern with, in whatever organization you're in. What's important to them? And usually with surgeons, it's block time, it's uh, uh, ability to get equipment
Yes.
that they need when they need it, because they want to grow their business too, and that's important to them. And you want to help support them because you want them to stay. It's a high competition for qualified surgeons. And so you want them to stay. You want them to be able to get the things they need to do their work and to grow their work. If there's new procedures, new equipment that they need, you need to be on top of that. And so um, letting them know that you're on their side, that you need to know what they need in order to succeed. And then once they realize that you're open to that, oh, there's no problem them telling you all the things they need. And so then you basically have to find out what the strategy, what the process is to accomplish that. What are the financial what's the financial structure, every year, asking for new equipment and so on. So there's a lot, like I said, the fact finding is huge. Um, the resources that you can use are your counterparts in other specialties in the organization, other departments. I've gained buddies in other departments that are my colleagues, my counterparts, and pick their brains. What do you do? How do you handle this? Because in the clinics, say the leader of the clinics, the ambulatory surgery area, they go through some of the same things, not as intense as far as equipment, but they definitely go through the same needs for equipment for their surgeons. And so I learned a lot from my colleagues. And so you pick their brains, then you communicate that to the surgeons at your committee meetings and so on, and let them know that you have found out the process, and then you share with them the process they need, if they have a request process, and let them know frequently what the status of their request is, because that's one thing, that surgeons complain about quite often and in different organizations, that once they request something, it goes into an abyss and they never hear about it.
Right.
And so it's keeping up communication is important.
So in that vein, lack of follow through is a mistake in
Yes.
which a new director may make to build that relationship and that negotiation?
Yes.
What are some other mistakes that a new director might make and take as wisdom?
I think humility is important. You try it as a brand new leader, you try to show a an image of knowing what you're doing, even though you may not, and so you walk the walk and talk the talk, even though you're learning like crazy in the background. Um, but you'll make mistakes. You're human and you'll make mistakes. And one of the best things you can do with your staff or with providers, with your medical director, is admit when you've made a mistake and what you've done about it. That builds trust so much, because then they feel they can trust you, because if you're wrong and you tell them you are and what you did about it and what you've learned from it, you make lots of points there. But it's hard. It's really hard because you don't want to look like you make mistakes. And that's really important to do.
What are some signs that a negotiation with a surgeon is becoming emotional?
Maybe comments from the surgeon or from their team or emails that show that they're upset with you, that they're, that more global statements that things aren't going right, that things, real negative things. You can realize there's a problem when you start hearing things like that right away. And so um, emotions, there you can't avoid those. You just can't avoid them, especially with things like block time or uh, if you, just another example, like if you determine there's a physician that is lacking either in their integrity or their skills or something, and there's your staff are coming to you with issues and so on, and you're keeping track and you're communicating with your medical director. You're not taking it to your committee, you're not taking it to the medical board, you're not doing any of that yet. You start out basics with communication and let them know what's happening. And that, even though there might be emotional things around it, you try to see things black and white. And emotion things, it's not like you ignore them, but you have to be very clear and focused on what steps to do, in your communication to get the issue resolved. And so it's recognizing them for sure. I've had to make responses with emails and to providers and to staff and so on. And you have to really show compassion. And you can have a combination of a nurturing, compassionate, but you also have to be firm. This is the process. This is what we will be going through to resolve this issue. And it's it's a mix, and you don't just get that talent immediately. You get it by making mistakes. You also get it by watching people. If you have an executive director, a regional director who's been there a while, which I've been lucky to have some very good role models. I've also had some that weren't so great, but you pick up the things from the good ones that work well, and you see that they're modeling good behavior, and so you steal shamelessly from those people that are great.
In terms of the emotional negotiation, you made a comment that stuck with me, that the surgeon might talk about things in a more global capacity. Instead of saying, I couldn't get this one surgery onto the calendar, it's no surgeon can get any surgeries done at this hospital, that type of thing. Am I
Yes.
correct? Is that kind of one of those examples?
That's what I was referring to, is when they're so emotional that they become negative, and they might even bring up something from 15 years prior, and just say, we've never been able to do this, or, and so it's important, in order to support dealing with those kinds of global statements and morale busters, I call them, keeping track of the positive things that you have done for the surgeons. I've always made sure that whatever equipment and whatever I've managed to procure for the surgeons and for their team, I always make sure that they know about it when it's come through, and keep a list. In my office, first thing I do in my office is I get like a 4x8 whiteboard put up on one wall, and that thing is full. I call it my brain board or mission control or whatever, and it's full of the wants and what you've achieved. And so everybody can see at a glance where you're at. This is what's happening. This is what we're doing to make everybody happy, staff and the surgeons. These are the procedures that we're trying to add, to our surgery approved procedure list, through requests from the surgeons. And it's very helpful. And I help set up agendas for my meetings with the surgeons from that brain board.
I like the brain board. That's an interesting idea because, for example, someone can walk by your office. You're not there. You're doing rounds. You might be doing something else, and they can see. And what they see on that brain board is the future in an optimistic kind of way. That's a clever idea.
It's pretty effective. I have That's evolved. My brain board's evolved over the couple decades to a bigger board for one thing. I don't even fool around. I just tell them I want my 4x8 whiteboard in my office, and it manages to get there. Yeah, I used to have just tiny little easel type, but
That's clever. So every director of surgical services has been in a situation where the negotiation has now gone off the rails. It's become adversarial, and it needs to be escalated. It needs to be additional support for the director needs to be brought in. Who might you recommend that they go to? Who should be the chain of command to help you get through an adversarial negotiation?
well, there's always a chain of command in every organization for sure. And if you're talking about one provider or a couple providers in a specialty, then their chain of command is the medical director, obviously. And then after that, it's the medical committee. And after that, it's the chief medical officer of the organization. And so there's always a chain of command that you can go through depending on where you're at currently, with whatever the issue is. And so it's important to learn what that chain of command is, who your contacts are. Um, Usually, if you have to go to the organizational chief medical officer, you've already involved your boss as well. And so you never blindside your boss. Your boss, you always make sure that they have your back, you have your boss's back. And so same with the medical director. And if things are escalating to that point, your boss is involved by that time. You involve them and you get the resources you need because your boss is usually wiser, knows the organization better. If they don't, they know how to contact who you need to help contain the situation and what steps to take.
So let's turn our attention to the C-suite. What advice or recommendations would you give to the C-suite about why negotiation capability with surgeons and anesthesiologists is critical for operational stability in the hospital?
Communication with the C-suite, they know that surgery is one of the biggest income providers for whatever organization you're in. They already know that. And so it's emergency department. If it's a hospital, it's emergency department, diagnostic imaging and surgery. Those tend to be the three main income providers for the hospital, or if it's an independent surgery center, it's surgery, obviously. And so it's important that when you talk to C-suite folks, like regarding capital purchases once a year and those kinds of things, um, you definitely have to vet those requests. You don't cry wolf. You don't ask for something if you haven't vetted it through your finance people. It's important to develop a rapport with your finance people so that they can help you do value analysis for each of the requests that you make. And it's important to find out what the process is when you're requesting things from your corporate leaders. You have to do your homework. It's important because if you get caught 2 or 3 times asking for something that really isn't good for the business overall, they don't trust you after that. And so you really have to, it's hard because the surgeons are right clamoring at your door. They want it now, they want it in a couple months. And they talk about how all their patients are suffering and they need it. And the sob stories are amazing. But you really have to get your ducks in a row before you present it to your C-suite leaders. And that's the main thing I can recommend for communication.
Turning now to talent acquisition. So if talent acquisition is recruiting a director of surgical services, screening, and then going to hand that candidate off to the C-suite, what questions can they ask a potential candidate that would demonstrate that that director of surgical services candidate would be an effective negotiator with the surgeons? What either role plays or case studies or situational questions might they ask that candidate to demonstrate that this person can negotiate with surgeons?
Well, I think, just they need to know whether the person's experienced anything remotely like that. If this is their first director position or manager position, they may not have. And so what you need to do is ascertain their skills as far as just basic negotiation and just, whether or not they have a logical mind, can you and think of the goodwill of the company in all negotiations with surgeons. Just ask. I would give them a scenario. A surgeon just came running in your door. This is an example. A surgeon just came running in your door, super emotional, just madder than a wet hen, and just saying, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. I don't like how the staff were treating me today. I didn't have what I needed. There were things that had to go back to CS, to get re-sterilized, and then we had to wait, and the patient's under anesthesia, and so they're going on and on. And so you have all these things hitting you at the same time and asking the candidate, how would you handle this? And in what priority would you approach, each of the issues that the surgeon just threw at you, all these things. So I would create scenarios like that. And it'll probably blow the candidate away because if they're brand new and new to the field, they have no idea what they're going to hit first. But it's good to find out how their brain works. Would they be calm? Would they be able to just, maybe they have to write things down, as a surgeon's talking to them, and see what all the issues are, but just see how their brain works with various scenarios like that.
That's terrific. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that I didn't ask that you think is relevant and important to a new director of surgical services preparing to negotiate with surgeons?
There are people who can go through the motions, are smart, and know the backgrounds. They know how to figure things out, but there also has to be a personal humility for each candidate, a likability factor, because they won't accomplish a whole lot if they just go through the motions and know the techniques and know the skills if they don't have that humility. That's the best word I could think of, because then the staff will like them, the surgeons will like them. And so there's some people that it's a bad sign when you have staff come tell you that a manager that you're managing, they can't tell from their face if they're mad at them. That's not a good sign. So that's just a small example, but people have to be able to read you a bit, to be a good leader.
Well, thank you. That's
Sure.
a wrap on today's episode of Legends to Leaders. A huge thank you to Cindy Bess for sharing her valuable insights on negotiating with anesthesiologists and surgeons. Key takeaways: take a proactive role, focus on what's important to the provider, whether it be block time or equipment, for example. Follow through and use humility in order to build trust. And of course, we heard about her brain board. What a clever idea that was. If you're negotiating or navigating the perioperative world, remember leadership is not just about the OR, it's about turning tension into triumph. Join us next time for more wisdom from legends shaping tomorrow's leaders. Until then, stay sharp and lead on.